We're talking today with Mr. Bill Myers of Grand Rapids, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of Grand Valley State University. Mr. Myers, can you start by giving us a little bit of background on yourself? For instance, where and when were you born?
I was born in Chicago, Illinois, in 1928, March 16th. And when I was very young, my dad died when I was 10 years old, and my mother died when I was 11 years old. So my aunt and uncle brought my sister and I and two other sisters to Michigan to live. And eventually they adopted us, and my name was changed from William Hall to William Myers.
Okay. And where did your aunt and uncle live? Where in Michigan?
They lived in Grand Rapids.
Okay.
And I've been here most of my life.
All right. Now, how did you come to join the Merchant Marine?
Well, during the days of World War II, my cousin, who lived a block away from me, and some of his friends, all about 1-2 years older than I was, they joined the Navy, and as all young men were doing in those days. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go too, but I was too young. So I inquired and found out that I could get in the Merchant Marine at 16 years
mm-hmm.
of age. And while I was talking to the recruiter in Grand Rapids, he says, we can send you to radio school. Well, I was pretty young to go to radio school. Most of the guys were a year or two older, or even more than that. Mm-hmm. But they sent me to Sheepshead Bay, which is in New York City. And after I graduated from boot camp.
Can you tell me a little bit about boot camp? What's boot camp like for Merchant Marine?
The boot camp in the Merchant Marine was actually run by the Navy. Mm-hmm. The only thing, due to international regulations, we couldn't have any armed rifles or anything. Mm-hmm. So we would have like sticks and brooms and things like that. But in any event, the training was much like the Navy boot camp was. We would go through the obstacle courses. Mm-hmm. We would jump off high platforms into a big pool, and we had to have life jackets in and protect ourselves. Mm-hmm. So that the life jacket didn't hit our chin if we had to jump overboard. So they did give us some training. A lot of merchant seamen, because of burning oil, were burned to death mm-hmm. with jumping off ships. So they told us to get away from the ship if that ever happened. Well, we didn't realize as young men that this was going to be so dangerous. Mm-hmm. To all of us, it was a big adventure.
Right.
And I guess it is to most young men. But we went through radio school. It was very difficult because I was so young, didn't have a lot of educational mm-hmm. background other than the 10th grade at Creston High School.
Well, what kind of education did you need? I mean, was there a lot of math, or what did you have to know?
There was a lot of math, but I fooled a lot of people about that math. My mother was a very brilliant young woman. She was valedictorian of her high school mm-hmm. in Ludington. And she was trying to teach me algebra when I was 10 years old. Mm-hmm. And because we come to Michigan, my aunt and uncle weren't really academically inclined mm-hmm. like my mother had been. And so I didn't spend a lot of time studying when mm-hmm. I went to high school. But when I wanted to go in the Merchant Marine, at that time I was working at Nash Kelvinator during the summertime, hauling propeller blades for aircraft. Mm-hmm. And I didn't have a lot to do except haul these propeller blades to the grinders.
Right.
So guess what I did? I had my algebra book and mm-hmm. I studied it diligently. I hadn't done too good in the class at Creston, but I did very well when I studied on my own mm-hmm. with motivation. When I finished boot camp, they said, "You're too young to go to radio school." Mm-hmm. And I said, "Well, that's why I joined." And he says, well, if you pass the test, you could go. He probably didn't think I could pass the test, but I did. And I went straight through, but I had to study very hard because my motivation was very great to do this.
Okay. Now, within radio school, then, what specific kinds of things did they teach you?
Well, the first thing we had to do was, of course, learn the Morse code. And if you had some kind of a musical background, that was a little bit easier. And I did. I always played the harmonica and the chromonica as time went by. But anyway, I passed the code test pretty well. It was the technical part of it, like you had to learn about radio transmitters, the theory of radio. We had to learn a lot about the rules and regulations for international communications with other countries. We had to learn other currencies. But during the war years, the main thing we had to learn is how to decipher code books, because all the messages would come in terms of code. Even your ship had a code, and you'd listen for that code name, and when you got it, then they would send you a message in 5-digit characters, and it took you hours to decipher it. When the war with Germany ended, it took 3 radio operators 8 hours to decode all the messages about the war ending with Germany and to continue on our path to Okinawa.
Okay. Now, how long do they have you spend in radio school?
About 6 months.
Okay. And while you're there, did you get any time to sort of go into New York City and that kind of thing?
Yes, they had a rule. We had a test every week to grade our progress. And if you passed, you could go on the weekend into New York City, and that was great adventure. At the time, I think on Broadway, I can't remember his name, the famous singer anyway. He was playing the Bobby Soxer at that time, Frank Sinatra. And I was so young that I liked to roller skate at the time. And about 52nd Street, I believe it was, they had a roller rink. So I went there, and I would meet girls, and this was a great adventure. New York City at that time looked like a metropolis compared to Grand Rapids.
Well, it probably still does.
Yes.
Maybe even more so then. Okay. Did you make a lot of friends while you were in school? Did you get close to a group of people, or?
No, we spent so much time studying that we couldn't make a lot of friends. But when we graduated, they gave us a picture, and most of the men in your own section would sign it, their names, so I have that. But no, there wasn't a lot of time to make friendships when you were in radio school. It was an intense activity because the reason why they would take 16-year-old men and put them in radio school as officers of a ship is because there was a dire need for them at that time. We were getting ready to end the war with Germany, and the war with Japan across the Pacific was in full intensity, and they needed 3 radio operators on every ship, so that was the reason.
So what would sort of a typical day be like when you're in radio school? I mean, when do you get up, and how many hours in class, and that kind of thing?
If I remember, we would get up about 5:30 in the morning, clean up, muster outside, and march to breakfast. And after breakfast, we had to come back. We had already made our beds, and everything would be shipshape. And then we would start class. Oh, my recollection was maybe 8 o'clock in the morning. And we would go all day long. And then we had homework at night, too. So it was an intense program that normally would take longer, but because of the need, they shortened it up and just expanded the hours that we were to study.
Okay. Now, at any point when you're in radio school, do they actually take you out onto ships so you can try it for real, or did you not do that until you actually got sent to a ship?
No, I had never been on a ship other than the launch to go over to Staten Island, but I had never been on a ship other than the Great Lakes with my dad, the car ferries.
Okay. So then when did you graduate from radio school?
It was in April 1945.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And then what was the first ship you were put on?
The first ship I was on was the SS John W. McKay. It left from Mobile, Alabama, in early May. And as I expressed to you before, we were in the Central Caribbean headed for Okinawa when the war with Germany ended.
Mm-hmm.
And we were given orders through our decoding message that we should continue on to Okinawa as planned.
You mentioned that decoding took 3 operators 8 hours. Was there a lot of messages going through? I mean, what?
Yes, it was more than one message. It would come from different commandants all around. But basically it said, well, the war with Germany has ended. This is great. Proceed on course as originally instructed.
Now, when you were sailing in the Caribbean at that point, were you still concerned about U-boats and that sort of thing, at least before the Germans surrendered?
No, I don't recall that. We were more concerned about crossing the Pacific in convoy.
Right.
And,
Yeah, what kind of ship was the McKay? Was it just a
the
freighter?
John W.
or-
McKay was a Liberty ship, and most of the ships that I was on were Liberty ships. The only ones I sailed with were Liberty ships.
Okay. And what's the experience like of sailing on a Liberty ship as opposed to something else, as far as you can tell?
Well, the Liberty ships were built post haste, and they could even complete a Liberty ship in the heyday in 2 days. I can't think of the man's name that was famous for building Liberty ships.
Yeah, Henry
but,
Kaiser, maybe.
Henry Kaiser, you're absolutely right. I just couldn't think of it. Anyway, the accommodations weren't bad on them. They were slower than some of the other ships that eventually come along. There was a series of ships called Victory ships, and they were faster than the Liberty ships. But Liberty ships were en masse. I think they made over 2,000 of them, and they delivered most of the military cargo in the world. And after the war was over, with the Marshall Plan under UNRWA, I guess they called it, we delivered cargo to help rehabilitate Europe for all the devastation and the Far East.
Right. Okay. Describe that first voyage for me. What was it like to actually get on one of these ships for the first time?
Well, the first voyage, as I pointed out, was quite an adventure. We went through the Caribbean, through the Panama Canal, and headed out into Pacific under convoy. And I don't know if we were in convoy to start, but we ended up in the Caroline Islands, and there were about 1,000 ships that were mustering there for the great invasion of Okinawa, which was necessary for the invasion of Japan. And going across the Pacific, one recollection that I had was because we were radio operators, we could listen to a lot of music and things that we would pipe to the crew so they could hear. And Tokyo Rose, she was absolutely fabulous. She could talk such sweet talk to you, and then she would play all the music that Americans loved. And then she would say, well, Jim, we know you're headed for Okinawa, and you don't realize it, but you're going to die there. And as a consequence, we want to tell you that you may not know it, but your wife is cheating on you in so many words. And we would listen to all that, but she absolutely had a sweet voice. She was very gentle, but much to her point, and the best music that you could imagine at that time. And but going across the Pacific, one of the things we had a gun crew aboard, a Navy gun crew that handled the guns, and occasionally they would have practice, and they would send up big black balloons, and then try and hit them. They never hit any of them, and we kind of wondered about that, but wasn't overly concerned. When we were 3 days out of Okinawa, they diverted us to Manila, but we got into a typhoon. And that was the first experience at inclement weather that we had experienced. But I remember looking from the wheelhouse down on deck. We had military cargo, some aircraft, folding wing aircraft on board, and we had a complete airfield, which was metal strips to make an airfield. And the timbers holding this in the typhoon broke loose. And the deck crew had to go out there and secure it. And I remember and can still visualize the problem that they had. They had poles, and these timbers were great, large timbers, and the sea would break over the hull and wash, and the guys would get caught between there and the timber and the deck. Nobody got hurt, but it was just touch and go. It was amazing to see them survive that.
And did they save the cargo, or did that go over the side of the ship?
No, we saved the cargo. We didn't lose any cargo. And when we finally got to Manila, there were about 100 sunken ships in the shallow harbor of Manila. This had been a battle that had maybe occurred 6 months before. The actual dates are not that clear in my mind, but I've done a lot of studying on World War II.
Were there like a lot of Japanese ships that we might have attacked by air?
We don't think that the Japanese Air Force was much of a factor at that time, but the submarines were. When we were going in to Manila, the course that had been given us to take, the Liberty ship 8 hours ahead of us, which are maybe 80 miles ahead of us, it got torpedoed. And they sent out an SOS, and we copied the message, and if I remember, we had to decode it, but the captain says, well, that's exactly where we're headed. But when we went through there, we did not see any problem with the Japanese submarines. But it took us 6 weeks to unload our cargo. We tied up to a sunken Japanese ship to unload our cargo, and they sent out barges. And took them about 6 weeks to unload our cargo before we were depart back to the States.
Why would it take 6 weeks? Was it just
Well,
not much equipment or not enough people, or?
Yeah, it took a lot of time. We weren't the only ship there. There were ships. Remember, a huge armada of ships were going to Okinawa, but when they won the battle, they didn't have enough facilities in Okinawa to handle the cargo, so they diverted a lot of ships to Manila. But we were there about 6 weeks.
Okay. Now, were you still there when the war with Japan ended, or had they sent you back
No,
out?
I'll explain what happened. After they unloaded our cargo, they gave us a course to take through the Philippine Islands. There's 7,000 Philippine islands. Some of them are just toothpick size, but some of them are large. Well, we were leaving the harbor and they had refused to give us any food, even though we were low on food, because the Port Authority there, the military said, we don't have enough food for our own people. You'll have to survive without that.
And in Manila, they also had to deal with a civilian population, which was pretty much all
yes,
starving
that
too.
was pretty bad. But I could go on and tell you a lot of stories about that, the time that I was in Manila. But one of the stories that I'll tell is, well, one of the mates and I decided to go ashore, and the mate was older than I, and he liked to drink a little bit. So we went to this candlelit little tiny bar, and they had rot gut whiskey that was probably not real good stuff. But while we were there, a soldier come in, and he said, hey, I know of a better bar. You want to go with me? And we said, yeah. So we went out, and he had transportation. It was a weapons carrier sized Jeep. And well, we got in, and he had been drinking quite a bit. And he says, can you drive this thing? And I says, sure. So I get behind the wheel, and I had never driven before in my life, other than to operate my dad's shift gear in his 1940 Chevrolet. And so I went about a block or so down the road. There was no lights or anything. Everything was, all the electricity was out. But he says, I can drive this damn thing better drunk than you can sober. So we change places, and he gets in and he drives another block or so. And they had a number of MPs that stopped to get and look at his registration for the car. Well, lo and behold, he didn't have any registration, because he stole the weapons carrier out of the motor pool. So they arrested him, and we explained to him, hey, we just seen this guy, and he just picked us up. We didn't have nothing to do with it. And they let us go. But now, getting back to leaving Manila. While we were leaving the harbor, they sent us a blinker light, and we had to go up and decode that. It's same Morse code with blinker. And they said, stop, we're going to give you new directions, because a Japanese submarine has been, a two-man submarine has been sighted on the path that we give you. So they gave us new orders, and about 2:00 a.m., all at once, the ship comes to a screeching halt. We had gone aground on the edge of a unmarked coral reef. And so we were stuck there, and we sent out messages. The Navy sent a ship to protect us and to pull us off and check our hull to make sure that we were not going to sink. So they found out that no, you're not going to sink. Took them 4 days to let us off. They were very good to us. We would go over to their ship and watch movies with them, and they had better food than we had. And one of the stories is that as we were crossing the Pacific, we were headed for the Panama Canal. The war with Japan ended, but we had run out of food. And I seen with my own eyes that I went down to the galley and I watched the cook kneading what flour we had left for bread. And here were weevils jumping out of the flour, and he would knead them back in. And then we would bake the bread, and then in the morning when we would have breakfast, we would get the bread slices and we would pick them up and pick all the dark spots out of the bread so that we could eat the bread.
Could have been protein.
Well, we were about 3 days out of Panama, and the war with Japan ended. And this was a marvelous time for the whole world. Well, they diverted us to Antofagasta, Chile. And they were going to check out our hull. And if our hull was all right, they would load us up with copper ore to go to the States. We were going to be headed for Savannah, Georgia, I believe.
Now, did they let you load up food anywhere, or were they sending you straight down to Chile?
They sent us straight down to Chile. And we were about 3 days out of there when that happened. And when we got there, there was a tremendous celebration for the end of the war. And they invited us to, as officers of the ship, we would, the ship chandler would have various prominent girls in the area, and we had a big dance and champagne and big, thick Argentine steaks, the best beef in the world at that time. And it was such a delight, and we had a celebration there. We were maybe there three weeks. In later years after the war, I used to sail down to Chile quite a bit for copper ore with Grace Lines, a big steamship company in the United States at that time. But that was the end of the war with Japan had occurred, and after that I decided to continue on sailing in the Merchant Marine, delivering UNRWA cargo to various places in the world that would help rehabilitate the countries that were just devastated.
Okay. What were some of the other places that you went to?
Well, I've been to Italy twice. I've been to China twice, been to Japan once, been up in Canada and all over the United States delivering cargo. South America many times, down to Chile in particular, Costa Rica, been to North Africa, a place called D'Arzu, which is in Algeria or Oran, I think it was.
Yeah, Oran is a big port in Algeria, along with Algiers. Yeah.
But I've been to the Philippines several times. I spent about 6 months of my life in total in the Philippines.
Tell us a little bit about the condition of some of these places. In Italy, for instance, where did you sail to?
Well, the first time I went to Italy, we went to a port called Civitavecchia. Civitavecchia is the port for Rome. Rome is about 30-35 miles inland from Civitavecchia. And Civitavecchia, the whole harbor had been devastated by bombing, and people were still quite unsettled. There wasn't much work available. The Italians weren't nearly as adept at cleaning up their mess as the Germans were, believe it or not. And which surprised me quite a bit. But that's the first time that that I went to Italy. It was Civitavecchia. We spent 1 day in Rome going through the various. We went to the Colosseum. We went through St. Peter's Basilica, the 7 hills of Rome, and that was quite a delight, and it's been in my memory all my life. The second time that we went to Italy, we went to Genoa. And Genoa, we dropped off some cargo there, and then we went to a port nearby called Savona. And what we did in Savona is we had taken a load of copra, which is dried coconut, from the Philippines there, because Savona had a soap factory, and they used the coconut copra to make coconut oil or coconut soup, or soap.
Yeah, and the French word for soap is savon, which would be S-A-V-O-N, so like
Yes.
Savona. I never knew that, the connection before. Okay.
Well, Savona was a very beautiful ancient town. They had curved cobble streets, and we always remember that.
Now, was that a place that had taken a lot less damage in the war? Was that in better
There
shape?
was no damage in Savona that I can recall. But we had military there. And the military said, hey, we'll invite you to a dance tonight if you give us some stores for the townspeople. So we gave them cans of food and things, and they invited us to this big dance. And while we were there, one of the girls that I had my eye on was with her grandmother. And they had accordion music. They played a lot of accordion music in Italy. And so I asked her to dance, and she did, but her grandmother watched me with an evil eye, which you can't blame her. But anyway, I never forgot her name. I'm not really good with names, but I did remember her name, Ornella Pasaguanca. And I've never seen her since. But for some reason, I always liked the ladies a lot, and no matter where I went, I always looked for ladies. But that's when you're very young and adventurous.
Okay. What did North Africa look like when you went there?
Well, North Africa was a little different situation. We went there. I can't recall the cargo that we had there, but we went into North Africa, and that was really a French protectorate at that time. And the Free French had agreed with Germany not to cause any problems, but to ally.
Oh, the Vichy French. The
Yes.
Free French were on our side.
I'm sorry, I
That's
got
okay.
it mixed up. Yes. But anyway, when we went there, I can recall one night I wanted to go to a dance. We weren't there only maybe 3-4 days. And we went to the dance, and the British were there, had a lot of soldiers there, and the girls were dancing with the British, but they wouldn't dance with us. And I didn't understand that. And because they wouldn't dance with us, later I found out what happened. It seemed like when Eisenhower wanted to get the Germans out of North Africa, he had to bomb that area. And the Germans had never bombed that area. So they did not like Americans. And so they wouldn't cooperate. Even this was a couple of years after, 3 years after the war.
And this was the French population there.
Yes,
Yeah,
that was the French population. And they had beautiful accordion music. They had a balcony in this dance pavilion, and they had 4 accordions that would all play in harmony with each other. And it was, you know, delightful to hear that music, but not delightful the fact that none of the girls would dance.
Okay. Did you see much at all of the Arab population there?
Yes, there were some Arabs, but we didn't see a lot of them. One of the officers on the ship and I went and had a Mediterranean meal, and that was run by Arabs. And I can recall that we had artichoke leaves, and we would pull them out and dip them maybe in olive oil or something. And that's about all I can remember about the Arab population at that time.
So you were in an area mostly where you had the French population and the Arabs were elsewhere.
Yes, it was mainly French that I seen at that
Okay.
time.
Tell me about going back to the Philippines. I mean, where else did you go there, or what else did you see there?
Well, on another voyage, we went to the Philippines, Cebu Island. And Cebu Island is one of the larger of the islands, and then we spent quite a bit of time. I forget the cargo that we had sent there, but from there, while we were in Cebu, I was a little older, and I drank a little at that time. And there was a bar girl that I liked real well there. And she asked me if I wanted to go to a Philippine independence ceremony. It was on an island just off Cebu. The name doesn't come to me now, but it's where Magellan had landed in the Philippines on his voyage around the world. And if I recall, he was killed there.
Yes, he was.
And anyway, we rented a sailboat, and it wasn't too far. Maybe it took us an hour or so to go across on this sailboat. The captain of the sailboat took us there for, it wasn't a large amount of money. But while we were there, they had this celebration for Philippine independence. And the greatest thing that happened, the mayor of the town or something was giving speeches, and when they come to the idea of Philippine independence, the crowd just roared. They wanted their independence, and we gave them their independence. But I can recall that, and that's about all the detail I remember of it. But they did not dislike Americans in the Philippines. In fact, the Philippines were always friendly, extra friendly towards us. And I always have good memories of my days in the Philippines. When we did the copra part on the southern tip of Luzon, there were two towns where we loaded copra. One was Legazpi, and the other one was Tobacco, I think it was. And at the foot of these two cities was a volcano. The name doesn't come to me. It's in my resume there, but it's the most perfect shaped volcano in the world at that time. Some of the men tried to climb up there, and they got all bitten up, and they never only made it about halfway up. I didn't go with them. But in any event, 30 days after we left there, we had to go through the Indian Ocean, and we stopped at Ceylon, which today is Sri Lanka. Colombo is the name of the city, and take on bunkers there. But 30 days after we left there, that volcano erupted.
Wow.
I don't think it was a severe eruption, but we had got the news from the radio about that happening. But, oh yeah, we had a lot of adventure when I went to sea, and I delight in having yearly reunions with my colleagues telling about our sea adventures.
Okay, tell me a little bit about going to China. Where did you go in China?
Made 2 trips to Shanghai, China. And Shanghai at that time was not the Shanghai of today. We can recall taking rickshaws. The city was a contrast between ultra-modern and ultra-ancient. But we would take rickshaws, and I remember the best movie theater that I've ever been in my whole life was in Shanghai, China. It was decorated with gorgeous red tapestry, the carpeted floor, movie theaters that would make ours look very mundane compared to that one. But Shanghai was a contrast of poverty and luxury. And the first time that I was there, I can recall we eventually got to a dock, and I think we had a cargo of coal. And they would have coolies unload our cargo, and they would take maybe a 400-pound basket between them, put the poles on their shoulder, and they did that all day long, and these men weighed maybe 90 pounds. But one of the sad things that I can remember is sometimes we would throw our garbage overboard, and there were boat people that lived on boats, and they would tie up in front of our ship or in the back of our ship. And they would wait for us to throw our garbage overboard, and they had long poles with a net on the end of it. They would scoop up our garbage and put it on the deck of their sampan boat and sort out the good garbage from the bad garbage. Now, I've seen that with my own eyes.
Yeah. You were there then, do you remember what year you were there? It's like 47 or something like that?
Yes, I think 47 and 48. We took a load of lumber from Coos Bay, Oregon, over to Shanghai, and this was the second time that I had been to Shanghai. And the word was that the lumber probably would go to the communists because the communists were nearby.
Right.
We left Shanghai about 6 weeks before the communists took over Shanghai. And you could tell that things were pretty close at that time, because the first time we were there, there was a currency exchange. Can't remember, CNC, I think they called the currency. It had more than tripled just in a couple of months from the first time we were there till the time that we got back.
I mean, the value of the dollar had tripled, or the value of the Chinese money had tripled?
The value of American money relative to that Chinese.
Yeah, because there was no confidence in the government surviving long enough to
Yes,
make money.
and 6 weeks after we left there, the communists invaded Shanghai, and that was it. Now, I can tell you a story about the second time that I was in Shanghai. One of the officers of the ship and I went to this bar nearby, and he liked to drink a little bit, but I was pretty young and I still didn't drink a lot. So it come time to leave, and he wanted to make time with the bar girls there and drink, and I said, no, I'm going back to the ship. Wasn't too far. So he says, okay, go, do your thing. So I start down the street, and I don't know, I maybe had gone a couple of blocks, and I wanted to get back in time for the last sampan that would take me out to the ship. We were anchored in the harbor this time. And so I had to be there, I think, by midnight. I'm walking down the street, and here comes a platoon of nationalist soldiers. And they were marching down, and they see me. They get up to me, and the leader of that platoon looks at me, and he grabs my wrist, my watch wrist. And he says, how much your watch, Joe? And I'm kind of dumb, And I say to him, oh, I know sell a good watch. And I can recall he looks at his platoon. In the meantime, they had surrounded me. And I was kind of scared, but, not that scared. And so I'm thinking to myself, well, they're going to get my wallet and they're going to get my watch, but then they'll let me go, But then the Lord smiled on me. Unbelievable thing happened. Down the street, about a half a block away, was a motor pool. And the motor pool was run by Sikh Indian police.
Right.
And Sikh police were very renowned at that time. They're elitist and very tall, wearing turbans. Well, this guy that ran the motor pool, the Sikh policeman, just wanted to stretch his legs. So he come out and stood in the middle of the road and he seen what was going on. Half a block away, the platoon leader just encircled me and marched right on. So I went up to talk to the Sikh policeman. He says, "You're very lucky," he said. He explained to me that seamen had been found floating in the river just about a half a block from where I was. So I stayed with him all night and talked with him, but he saved my life, if that was their intent. I have no, I was willing to give my wallet up and my watch up to save my life, but I didn't realize that they may want to destroy the evidence. But he says I can recall his very words to this day. "You're very lucky," he said.
Right. Now, you also mentioned going to Japan. What did you see when you went there?
We went to Kobe, Japan, and while we were there, we had some military cargo, which I can't recall, but the Army security officer come aboard to get the cargo. And I was up on the deck with the captain, and he was talking with this security officer, and all at once a Japanese started to come up the ladder. And the Army security officer waited till the last instant. And when he was close enough, he took his boot and smashed it right in that guy's face. And the guy let hold of the rails and fell about 8-10 feet down the ladder in a crumpled mass. And he finally was able to get up and disappeared off the ship. I never found out why, and I thought it was very cruel, and to this day I think it's very cruel. But one of the things that we noticed at that time, this was a couple of years after the war was ended, when we would walk down the street, none of the Japanese people on that street would make any contact with us. They all hung their heads down and walked the other way, and we looked to see, like, hey, we're friends now, the war's over. But they were all still upset that Americans had occupied their country. Later, we went to a Japanese tea house. We were only there a day or so. And we had a good time at the tea house. The people were friendly in the tea house. But on the street, not one of them would make eye contact with us. And I can recall that. Today, things have changed quite a bit.
Tell me a little bit about the people that you served with on some of these ships. Either you felt, did you get to know sort of the other officers mostly, or the seamen, or who did you have contact with?
Because I was an officer of their ship, we ate in the officers' mess, and my only friends on the ship were officers of the ship. We weren't isolated from the crew, but it's just because of our association that the crew had their quarters, and the deck crew. Even when I would explore the ship, I was always academically inclined, and I wanted to learn everything about ships that I could. So eventually I learned to navigate. I bought a sextant and had the second mate teach me how to use it, which I accomplished. And I'd go down in the engine room and learn all about triple expansion steam engines. And but most of the time, we mainly conferred with the officers of the ship. We weren't unfriendly to the crew, not at all. But most of my experience were with officers on the ship.
And what sort of background do the officers tend to have?
Well, some of them were old salts. A lot of them had joined the war effort, and they had various backgrounds. I can't say in particular, but a lot of them were friendly. I used to sail out of New Orleans a lot. And one of the chief engineers on the ship I was on, he invited me to his home in Algiers, which is right across
Right.
from New Orleans. And they had a shirt-tail relative that was the manager of one of the big department stores in New Orleans. So they invited me up to their home, very elegant home, and they asked me if I wanted to go crawfishing. Well, I said, sure. So we went crawfishing one day, and that requires you to put on hip boots in a swamp-type atmosphere. And they had these nets that you open up, a little metal frame with a piece of cloth on the bottom with a safety pin in the middle, and you would put what they called a melt on it. It was part of a cow, I don't know what part. But you would take these things and open them up and walk around, and every 10, 15 feet you would put one of these little nets down. Or it wasn't a net, but it was a device to catch crawfish. And then after you got them all down, you'd recircle back and you'd pick these things up, and you had a gunny sack on your back, and you'd dump all the crawfish in there. And so after a few hours, we all quit and we went back to the ranch, so to speak, and we had a big wash tub, and they would wash and clean all the crawfish off with salt water and things. And then after they cleaned all the crap out of them, then they put it on a bonfire and heated it up, and we had crawfish and beer. So it was quite an experience. Always adventure, especially New Orleans was quite a place.
Now, did the personnel on the ships change much after the war ended? Do you have a lot of people who kind of went out of the Merchant Marine service and get replaced by others, or?
No, most of the people that had sailed during the war stayed on to deliver UNRWA cargo to the various places in the world that needed it. Okay. And I don't ever recall any officer on the ship that I knew of that had come in after the war. Some of the graduates from like radio school, after the war ended, they closed the school down. But some of the men were 3/4 of the way through, and they stayed open long enough to let them graduate. And then they contributed. They hadn't actually sailed during the war, but right after the war they sailed.
Okay. Now, why did you eventually leave the Merchant Marine?
Well, as time went by, the need for the UNRWA cargo and things was gradually tapering off. This is like 4 years after the war ended. And a lot of the American merchant ships hadn't been designed to run forever, a lot of the Liberty ships, for example. So they began to scrap a lot of them, and there wasn't any need for 3 radio operators anymore, so they had an excess supply of radio operators that wanted to stay on there. So it became harder and harder to get a berth. When you'd go into a place like New Orleans and you were on the beach for 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, as time went by, it got longer. It cost you a lot of money to survive as a young man. And I was on my own. And as a consequence, I said, well, it's kind of time to quit. I'm going back and get my education completed. A lot of the men that I went to school with, they went on to college. But I was too smart for that. I said, well, let me get a job. I was on my own. My aunt and uncle no longer supported me. I was, independent that way. So I would get jobs, and they paid at that time maybe $35 a week. And I had met a girl who I wanted to be my future wife. But I couldn't support her on the amount of money that they paid me. and I was about 20 years old at the time. And I thought I was ready to be married, and eventually I married her at 23 years of age. But I took a job with the United States Tobacco Company, and I had all southwestern Michigan as my territory. So I had to take this van and drive maybe 100 miles a day and check into a hotel at night or a motel. Didn't have a lot of motels at that time. But put up advertising at these out-of-way places, give out samples of modeled smoking tobacco and Skoal snuff to all the places. And I did a good job at that. They really liked me. But I worked so hard that I said, if I got to work this hard, I'm going to be in my own business. Never thought about college because I would have had to take all the money that I saved and gone to college, and that didn't seem to equate very well at that time. Well, as it turned out, I bought a store in Benton Harbor. And I thought my wife, or my future wife-to-be, would go down there and run the store with me. But she had a really good job in Grand Rapids and didn't want to go down there. So after about a year, I sold the store and lost about half my money. But it was a great experience, and eventually I went to work for William P. Lear, if you recall Lear Jet. And I worked in his engineering model shop, and eventually became an electronics technician, and eventually they promoted me to an engineer without a degree. I have a couple of patents, and eventually I left Lear because I needed more experience than they would give me, and so I became a contract engineer and worked for 14 different companies and got a lot of experience, and went back with what was Lear Siegler and eventually Smith Industries. Worked for them 7 times, twice direct and 5 times on contract. But I had a marvelous career as an engineer, many delightful assignments. I would keep my family here in Grand Rapids, except in the summertime I'd bring them with me when they were out of school. But for a guy without a degree, I did pretty good. I can't complain.
To look back on the whole thing now, how do you think your time in the Merchant Marine affected you?
It affected me because I grew up in the Merchant Marine. I was a young kid, and I grew up as a man in the Merchant Marine and had many adventures all over the world. And I learned a lot about the world. The world has changed today from what it was at that time, but at that time it was rather amazing to me to see how devastated places were. I can recall being in Germany, in Bremen, and on a streetcar going from our ship's dock to downtown Bremen. There were blocks and blocks as far as your eye could see where we had leveled the apartment houses right to the ground. Nothing stood higher than maybe my shoulders. And the story that I found out later is we had to bomb them because the Germans put in all their small factories right in the midst of the apartment complexes that they had there. And so we bombed them, and a lot of civilians were killed. And when I was in Germany, I found that the German people were very astute at cleaning things, very meticulous. But one of the experiences that I seen that saddens me to this day, young girls from good German families would go out and befriend sailors and soldiers with the idea of getting food, clothing, whatever they could muster from their friends for sex.
Right.
And I can speak honestly, that one girl took me right to her family and introduced me right to her whole family. We went upstairs to her bedroom. Now, that upsets me even to this day.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me today. You've covered an awful lot of ground and laid out a lot of stuff for us. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope I told you a few sea stories.